Welcome back to the Cranmer Fellows podcast. My name is Jonathan Groves. I'm the assistant rector at Church of the Good Shepherd in Binghamton, New York. And I'm here once again with my co-host, Matt Kennedy, rector of Church of the Good Shepherd, canon for preaching, the Diocese of the Living Word. And now, for the first time, Grandpa. Congrats, Matt.
I feel old. Thank you.
Grandpa Kennedy.
Yeah, I'm surprised people are. I'm not that old actually by years, but here it is. It's probably better because I have more. Maybe I'll be able to see my great grandchildren if I don't die before too long.
Hey man, that's the goal, right? Great grandchildren.
Right.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
how's everyone doing? How's the baby?
Surprised my right to they get married. Yeah. I was totally in favor of because the younger you are, the more babies you can have, and the more babies you have, the better the world is. So I was very happy. But since she's 18, she's like bouncing back like she didn't even have a baby. So it's pretty amazing. We had our last child at like 35, and Anne was like, it took her weeks to like get back to be able to move around and everything. But Addie's like totally okay now, seems like. So, and Aiden's shell shocked, because it's his first experience of having to be a father, and that's pretty shocking. And he had to change the diapers at first too, so because she couldn't do it. So that's always a shock. The first diaper change is always the more it's quite an initiation. It's the most it's the grossest one, I think, of all the diaper changes is that first one.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that he had that experience.
When Sawyer was born, he had to go into the NICU for a few days. So I didn't get to change his diaper for 4 days. So they got all of that, all those first ones. All the nurses got to do that. Oh man, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're all so happy for Addie and Aiden and for you guys, and it's a cute baby. So yeah, it's great. It's got me thinking also about our topic for today, because I mean, God's really, blessed our church with babies and a lot of families. And, Matt, you and I have talked about this, how a lot of the families now, and this has changed in the last 5 years, a lot of the families don't want to just have their kids in a faithful Bible believing, Bible preaching church, which, that's first priority. But I would say most of the young families in our church want to grow their kids up to be Anglican.
Yeah.
There's been a change over the last few years. And then not only that, but we've had a lot of people come to Good Shepherd and because of Anglicanism. And it just got me thinking, we should talk about why you and I are Anglican. I mean, we have totally different stories. You grew up in it. I didn't. And then maybe we can discuss the differences between it and a few other big denominations. But first, what do you think it is about Anglicanism that is bringing, at least it seems like to me, what I see, a lot of people into it? And then why, if you were to guess, what is it about Anglicanism that makes parents want to raise their kids in it?
Well, I mean, I think we're coming out of an era of the big box church, the kind of the seeker sensitive mega church movement. I'm not I say coming out of it because I think the generation that really drove that is, getting older, and those churches, at least in my experience, maybe this is totally anecdotal, maybe I'm wrong, but they haven't been able to hang on to the next generation very well. And it's kind of ironic because a lot of the rationale behind making church look like the world is to keep the youth, right? We've got to appeal to the youth by making the church cool or with it, so they don't feel like they're going back into the Stone Ages to go when they go to church. But it turns out, the younger people that have come to Good Shepherd anyway, they want the Stone Ages. they, they I think there's a hunger and thirst for something that is historic, that has a heritage to it, that isn't a flash in the pan. That you know, if you've been raised in a church, you go to a church where you can, you have the summer sermon series on the different summer movies out, and you're sitting in the movie theater chairs, and it's just every Sunday, every year, something different is happening because the church is trying to keep up with kind of the cultural winds. Maybe they're teaching good doctrine, but the 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 aesthetics and the ethos is all we've got to be with. We've got to maintain our cultural cachet by looking like the culture.
Mm.
Uh, and so if you're there's feels it feels rootless, I would imagine. I I have never been a member of one of those kinds of churches. I've never attended for a long period of time, but everyone I've talked to coming out of them, they say basically the same thing. That there's no it feels like kind of foundationless and rootless. And they come to Good Shepherd, or they come to another Anglican church, and they see, okay, well, these we're saying prayers that have been around in the church for hundreds of years, sometimes stretching back to the earliest points in church history, and of course, in addition to the scriptures that are reflected in our prayer book and liturgy. You have traditions of the way worship is done that haven't changed much. They've changed some, but they haven't changed much over the course of 1,500 years, maybe longer. Longer actually, if you go back and you read Justin Martyr's account of what what church services were like in the second century. Uh, so there's something here that is unchanging. I think that's appealing in a in a culture that's chaotic, and in sometimes in the church culture that's chaotic. To have something that's solid, it's not going to shift under your feet every time the newest thing rolls around. It's kind of nice. I mean, like I one great thing about being Anglican is it's pretty cheap. I mean, you don't have to like. I think if you're trying to keep up with the big box churches, you got to put a lot of money out on your light show, on your digital screens, on your smoke machines. That cost a lot of money to keep up with the uh, with the with the show, right? It's
Yeah.
got to put a show on every Sunday. It doesn't cost much just to print up bulletins and wear the same vestments you always wear every year, and, and there's not, it's really not trying to keep up with anybody. I also think there's kind of an attractiveness about that you walk into a church like ours or like another Anglican church, and there is no catering. There's no sense that you are being counted. The church isn't needy for you. Um, and I think that there's sometimes communicated in the larger seeker sensitive church that the church really needs you to stay. We really want you are the most important person in the entire universe, and you are so special. And we would love to. We're going to change everything about the way we worship for you. And that contributes to the kind of consumerist mindset that people have had about church, where the church is like which one entertains me most. Whereas you come to an Anglican church, no one's doing that. Like you can either worship with everybody else or not, but we're not going to change our liturgy for a new person coming in. Not because we don't love new people coming in, we do, but because when you enter the church, you're entering into another country that's not your own. You're entering into God's kingdom, and so things are going to be done His way, not my way, not your way, not not anybody's way. Which
Yeah.
I think is an attractive thing.
Yeah. So um, there's something about the rootedness of tradition um, that appeals to people. Uh, it's one of the misconceptions of I'd say of the big box church that tries to uh, keep up with um, the the wind of culture, um, is that uh, we as people desire and need um, groundedness. We need something to order our lives, and there really isn't anything like that in society. By like in our culture, there's a lack of an order, and I mean, there's so many reasons why that is, but there is so there's like a deep human need to that order, and of course, it would be that way because it's how God created us. He created the world with an order. He created us in to be within that order, and to have an order. I mean, the orders are weeks, right? Our work week,
Yeah.
and so like our work week, our rest, and so he's the God of order, um, and the liturgical aspect of the Anglican Church. It, it feeds that need that people have. Um, so why Anglicanism though? Because there's also a lot of people who are driven out of the big box, uh, biggie evangelicalism churches into Rome, or Eastern Orthodoxy. Why do you think like what? I'm a Protestant. What went wrong there?
Well, okay. So I think I actually had a coffee with a young man today, who said this, and I think he's right. Is that within evangelicalism, there really isn't a some people have it, but many people have this kind of assumption that there's evangelicalism and then there's Rome or Orthodoxy, right? There's nothing in between. Like the existence of historical Protestant denominations seems to not be even on the radar screen, probably because they associate them with the main lines, which are heretical, right? So the idea of an orthodox, biblically orthodox denomination with liturgy and beauty and sacraments, but not Rome or not Orthodoxy, is has, at least in a lot of people's minds, just not been something that they've even known about. So when I think an evangelical who has biblical convictions, who says, "I really don't want to," I believe in the justification by faith alone. I believe in sola scriptura. I believe in the solas of the Reformation, but I don't. So I can't be Roman, but I really can't worship anymore in with the concert church. What do I do? When they happen upon Anglicanism or Lutheranism or another liturgical Protestant expression, I think it's a breath of fresh air. I can have the historicity, the beauty, the foundation without uh, uh, I can have the word preached without all of the craziness that goes along with it in some evangelical circles. But if I go to, if you go to Rome or you go to Orthodoxy, one thing you are losing. You with Orthodoxy. I think the liturgy is beautiful. Of course, I think there's problems with the words of the liturgy in some cases, but it's a beautiful liturgy. If you've ever been, it's gorgeous. Long but beautiful. Uh, Roman liturgy, not always, but sometimes can be done very well in a beautiful way. But almost always, not always, but almost always, you have nothing for a sermon. You have either like a 5 minute, you know, sermonette, not necessarily based on the scriptures, but just kind of the priest talking about something, or uh, in Orthodoxy, it's kind of the same. There's just not an emphasis on the word like there is in uh, Protestant uh, historical Protestant denominations. So you're gonna if you exchange your big box evangelical church for Rome or Orthodoxy, you really are exchanging word for liturgy. Um, Whereas if you come to Anglicanism or Lutheranism or the historic Protestant denominations that are Orthodox, you get both. You get word and liturgy joined together as in the way that I think they always were intended to be.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you grew up in it. You grew up in the Episcopal Church. So, but whenever uh, you got older and um, you went to seminary, and as you were thinking through pastoral ministry, did you ever think about other denominations and moving over?
I did, but as a kid, I didn't, I didn't believe in Jesus as a child. I, uh, I mean, I think I probably, if you would have asked me, do I believe in Jesus, I would have said so, but I didn't know what I didn't. I wasn't a convicted believer in Jesus. But I like church. I enjoyed it growing up. Um, there were pretty girls in church, but also I did kind of like the liturgy. I was a big King Arthur buff, and so yeah, it seemed like kind of really medieval, and like you could go to church and then go outside and play knight in armor. So it was kind of cool for that reason. As a little kid, I remember thinking that. And I loved the I loved the hymns. I loved the actual worship part of it. I didn't have any actual faith. So the aesthetics of it appealed to me. Um, and So when I became a Christian after college, in which I'd left the church, I'd left everything, I just jettisoned my entire faith, what's to the extent that I had any. And after college, I had a conversion experience, and I was thinking, where do I go? What do I do? And I did try some other churches, and because I'd been raised Anglican or Episcopalian, I guess, um, I I was kind of surprised. What is this? Really, this is all we're doing? We're gonna come in, and I don't mean to denigrate these other churches I went to because they were all faithful, Bible believing, word centered, preaching churches, good places. But I felt, it's, where's the we're just kind of gathering, we're singing some songs, we're going to listen to some music, and then this guy is going to preach, which good sermon, great. But then what? Then you go home, and that's it. So it struck me as hollow, not hollow in the sense that Jesus wasn't there. Just
Sure.
it wasn't. I didn't feel like I'd gone to church.
Hmm.
Uh, so I decided I should try to find an Episcopal church. This is before the split, of course.
Mhm.
And I was in Houston, Texas, so there was some chance of finding an Orthodox Episcopal church, and I found one. And the rest is kind of history. But I just couldn't. And so I do have kind of a. I never thought, and I thought we're talking about this the other day. The idea that Anglicanism would ever be popular, like something that young people would want to do, was like it blew our minds. From what, because that's never happened. Throughout our ministry here at Good Shepherd. Uh, People have come to Good Shepherd from evangelical churches, but up until recently, up until the last 5 years, it's been we're coming to Good Shepherd for the teaching. We're holding our nose to the liturgy. We like the expository preaching. We like the Bible studies. We like the people, but liturgy, we can take it or leave it. That has been generally the ethos of people who come in new. Last 5 years or so, no, it's the opposite. Well, not
Yeah.
only they love the teaching and the preaching, but they love the liturgy. When they want their, like you said, their kids to be raised in it, and they're hungry for it. We've
Yeah.
had to add new ceremony. We've never done candle mass before, but we're
Yeah.
suddenly doing candle mass because it's on demand. So
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. And uh, I think not all, but it, from my perspective, it is the young families that are sort of pushing it in that direction. Those who have um, children, and so speaking as a father, as a young father, um, I uh, I want to give my kids a um, a good heritage, something that they can hold on to, and I didn't really get that in my in the Baptist church, and then there was a time where I was in a charismatic church, but then I went back to um, a Baptist church, and I mean, of course, like there are. I'm not saying that there aren't traditions there that aren't passed down. Of course, there are, but Anglicanism is a unique tradition that really offers uh, a just I think a beautiful inheritance for children. And like the prayer book itself is just um, it directs, it guides you in how to worship. And it's interesting to hear you talk about having grown up in the Episcopal Church and then going to the non-denominational churches, and leaving that feeling like there's something missing, because that was the initial thing that got me thinking through what else is there. It was one Sunday in my very faithful Reformed Baptist church, and it was so grateful for that church. I grew a lot there, and this was in college, and did a lot of ministry with them, and they helped me do a lot of discerning in pastoral ministry. But it was one Sunday where I just the thought came in my head, like, is this all? Is this
Yeah.
is all it is? It wasn't initially a theological question. It was a worship question. It was, is this all there is to do on Sunday together? And I felt like I was missing something. Um, I felt guilty at first because I was like, well, the sermon's really great, and the songs we're singing are biblical and very good, and there's a great community.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I just didn't know what it was. It wasn't until the prayer book shaping my worship. That's when I realized, this is what I needed. This is what I was missing. But it wasn't initially a theological question. That stuff came later. Um, I don't know where I was going with that, but uh, oh yeah, with kids, it for me as a dad, it's it's like a very easy or maybe organic thing to kind of pass on to my kids. And then it is interesting to think about, like, my story, but on the flip side, like whenever my kids get older, and if they end up moving away and they're trying to find a church, they won't have the experience of, oh, I'm missing something. It'll be more of um uh uh going into a church and it's stripping away what you've had, right? So I'm always curious to, I'm curious to see in the future what'll happen. But um I love Anglicanism. Maybe we can get into the theological stuff a little bit, because there are other liturgical churches. Uh, Lutheranism would probably be, or talking liturgical Protestant churches.
Right.
Lutheranism would be a big one. Presbyterianism, to some degree, it differs on church, how liturgical you're going to be. But maybe we can discuss some of those theological things. So as you're in seminary, and you're going to an Episcopal church in seminary.
Yes.
Yeah. Where'd you go? Where'd you go to seminary again?
Virginia Theological Seminary.
Okay. Where'd you go to church during that time?
The Falls Church.
Okay. That's
Yes.
right. Falls.
John Yates. I
John.
interned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I imagine at some point in your training, you did comparative work theologically, like looking at theology in the Anglican Church, compared to Lutheranism, Presbyterianism. What was it? Why didn't you go Lutheran or Presbyterian or something else while you were doing that comparative work?
I Lutheranism. I couldn't. I love the expression of Lutheranism, and what of the things I love about Lutheranism is the law gospel distinction, which I think is so crucial in Lutheran preaching and in Lutheran everything Lutheran. It really does nail home the very stark difference between law and gospel that I think some in the Reformed world have forgotten, or at least they don't make a right distinction between the two, and they use sometimes the law as if it's the gospel, and they put heavy burdens on people. So I really appreciate that about the Lutheran tradition. But I do differ with them on sacraments in particular. Baptism being one. I mean, they believe that at baptism, and speaking here of infant baptism, an infant or a child is always given through baptism justifying faith. Now, I'm perfectly happy with the notion of a child having justifying faith, but the problem with saying that all children baptized are given justifying faith is you also have to then jettison any idea that God, once He brings you to Himself through Jesus Christ and joins you in a mystical union to His Son, uh, keeps you. You have to jettison that idea. If you accept, you have to then say no. Once by grace you are brought into the bosom of Christ, you can jump right out of that when God's not going to do anything in your heart or mind or soul to 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 keep you in the faith. And I just can't go there. I am pretty persuaded about the doctrine of the perseverance of the saints. And the reason you can't have that doctrine if you're Lutheran is because you have to accept that not everyone baptized as an infant remains faithful, obviously. So they can't have that doctrine. And I think it's biblically taught. I think both. Um, I think that doctrine is biblically taught. Um, so I can't go with baptismal justification.
So
I do, go
can
ahead.
I stop you right there? Um, what can you walk us through a little bit when when a Lutheran cites Peter and saying baptism now saves you, because that's that the go Lutherans will go there to sort of just say this is clear. It says that baptism saves you. Um, what do you say
Yeah.
to that?
Yeah. I mean, it's the Bible, so I'm not going to say no. It doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The question is what that means, right? How does that play out? So does that necessarily mean that every single baptized baby is justified and before God and heaven bound? And as salvation is a much broader word in Scripture than just justification, right? So, um, is what is God doing in baptism isn't um, answered in full by just quoting Peter, baptism saves you. Or we have to ask the question, what does that mean? Um, and in fact, it's followed up by a path in that text. I think I don't have it in front of my face, but Peter follows that up by saying or uh, not as a washing.
Right.
Are you there? Can you read it?
Yeah. Not as a
Yeah.
removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience.
Right, right, right. So that seems to undo the idea that it necessarily uh, brings about a justifying cleansing.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, I mean, I here if you read the 1662 prayer book, which is our doctrine of baptism is, I think, biblical, but it is expressed in an authoritative way for us in the prayer book um, prayer book liturgy. And if you go and you read that, you'll see there's the prayers are all pleading with God to regenerate the child, to may this child who's being baptized be born again and ultimately come to faith. Um, that we don't believe that it's clear in that liturgy that we don't believe that the baby necessarily is given faith, because that's why we have the godparents or the parents say the vows for the baby. And it explicitly says that will you be the surety for this child before or for the present, so that when the child ultimately comes of age, he or she will be able to profess herself or himself. Um, so so uh, the Anglican idea is a very optimistic, hopeful belief that at baptism God regenerates children, without saying that He always necessarily regenerates children.
Mm.
Regeneration is the idea of you being your old self, your old flesh is killed off, and you're given new birth. You're given your new creation at that point. Um, so that is what baptism. That's what the water symbolizes or signifies is the inner new birth, inner regeneration of the child, the washing away of the old and the cleansing and the bringing about of the new, which I believe God does at baptism in the vast majority of cases for infants, but not always. Um, so for me, I was baptized when I was 3. I believe that God used that baptism to bring me to faith when I was.
Mhm.
I believe that God used the baptism to regenerate me and bring me to faith 20 something years later.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
it's,
we don't put a timestamp on it.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. But I would look back to my baptism as the moment
Sure.
where that affected. Um,
Right. I think it's J.I. Packer who phrases it that um, in baptism, God uh, gives you the gift, and by faith, you
right. By
unwrap it.
grace, I mean the grace gives you the faith too. But yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Um, and so you you can reject it your whole life, um, or 20 years down the line, you can live in light of it, and that grace can take effect.
Right.
Um, and the I've just opened up what J.C. Ryle writes about that language in the prayer book about regeneration and the baptismal service, and he has a really helpful chapter in his book Knots Untied, where he uh, interprets all that language with the phrase uh, uh, that the prayer book liturgy has a charitable assumption
Yes.
of what's going on. Uh, you could, after baptizing somebody, anybody, a child or an adult, say, now we don't really know
Right.
if they're really saved.
Right.
We hope they are. Yeah, I mean, you could
Yeah.
say that. You could say that. And we know that people make false professions
Right.
and are baptized as adults, and so it's the same thing with children. We have this charitable assumption that that God is regenerating this has regenerated this person, and then the assumption is then that that child that grows up in the church is hearing the gospel. God put that child in a Christian home in the church. Why would he not? Why would he not save that child?
Right.
Honestly, and if you look at the statistics, if the statistics are right in any way, the exception to the rule is really people who leave the church. I mean, the majority of people who grow up in the church stay in the church, or at least seem to stay believers. So, yeah, of course, infant baptism. I would say, in my experience, is the biggest hurdle for people to get over when they do come into the Anglican Church.
Yes.
It, once infant baptism was clear to me as biblical, everything else had already worked itself out in Anglicanism. It was just that I was working through, and it was Romans 4 that sealed it for me, because I was to some extent convinced by the uh, circumcision baptism correlation, and yet I still had this struggle with it, because to me the sign of circumcision seemed like it was saying something different, and baptism, if it's true that it's communicating justification and regeneration, that to me it still is like, but it seems like that has to be for the believer, the individual believer. And I had read Romans 4 many times, but it was this last time where it finally clicked. where Paul says that Abraham received the sign of circumcision as a sign of justification by faith. Okay, all right,
And
and
he was instructed to give that sign to his son at
and
age.
his servants.
Right.
They all his servants, his all the servants, the children's servants, the every children or child, every person in his household then received the sign of justification by faith. But we are not told anything about their faith.
Right. Right.
So it was that was like, okay, if God was working that way in the old covenant, and if circumcision really was, as Romans says, a sign of justification by faith in the old covenant, why then would it not be in the new covenant? When we're actually dealing with the fullness of justification by faith, and given a sign of that cleansing and that forgiveness and that justification. That when you see that, or at least when I saw that, then going back and reading in Acts about the household baptisms, it just made sense. It's like, well,
Right.
of course they baptized whatever infants were in there or children, because
And
they would
yet
understand it that way.
you'd have, unless there's an explicit command from the apostles saying, "Please don't baptize your babies." It's like Jewish people are just who are become Christians are going to baptize their babies.
They're just gonna do it.
Why would that's if this is the new covenant sign, like
Right.
circumcision was the old covenant sign, and we were circumcising our baby boys. Why wouldn't we baptize everybody? It just,
Yeah.
what would stop him? The only thing that would stop them would be a command
Yeah.
from the apostles, and there is no command. So,
Nope. There isn't. And Paul in Ephesians 6, he assumes that the children in the church are believers. He tells them to obey the law of God. What is
right.
he say? Is he saying, everybody else, trust in Christ, but kids, you need to obey God's law?
Right, no, he's addressing them as Christians, right?
Yeah, he is. Yeah,
As if they're believers, and you see the same thing with in 1 Corinthians 7 with the children of a believer and a non-believer. They're treated as covenant children,
yeah,
even though they're who knows how old they are. They could be any age. The text doesn't specify. So,
right. So baptismal regeneration with Lutheranism. I'm there with you. That was something that I couldn't get behind. Also the Lord's Supper.
yeah.
I'd say,
So
can you say about that?
yeah, Lutherans believe that at the Lord's Supper, there's a kind of an analogy with the incarnation. At the incarnation, God the Son remains, of course, fully true God, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, and yet he takes on the true human nature. And so there's no in one person, there's no intermingling of the two, and yet there's still one person, the two natures in one Christ. So they take that and they make an analogy there with the sacrament of communion, the Eucharist, and they say uh, the bread remains fully bread, the wine remains true wine, doesn't change its substance. As the Roman Catholics teach in transubstantiation. Uh, the Lutherans do not believe that the substance of the bread or the substance of the wine changes. They do believe that Christ's substantial true body is added to the bread and to the wine, so that you receive Christ in a substantial way in, through, and under the bread. Um, and so they do have they would agree with the Roman Catholics that you feed on Christ, his actual flesh and blood, although it's in a mystical way. Um, Now, the problem that Anglicans have had with that formulation, as well as with the formulation of the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, is we would argue that that does violence to the hypostatic union. That the hypostatic union is a fancy theological word we use for the union of Christ's human and divine nature, and it would do violence to that because it would make Christ's human nature suddenly inhuman, right? Does it pertain to a real, true human body to be multiplied in thousands and maybe millions of different places at one time in place? No, that's not what human bodies do. That's a confusion of the attributes. So the one attribute of God is omnipresence, That's not a human attribute. That's a divine attribute. Um, so it seems like, from our perspective, that the divine attribute of omnipresence is being given to the human Christ, and it it does to for that when that happens, you lose an essential aspect of our salvation, um, the full humanity of Christ as an ascended Lord, not just on the cross dying, but as ascending and being with um, one of us up seated at the right hand of the Father. So it's a big issue. It's really important that we don't lose um, that thing. And so, and if you just think about the Last Supper, I mean, if you ever get in an argument with Lutherans, and this goes back to Luther, he did this too. Um, they will go right back to Jesus's words. This is my body. This is my body. This is my body. So are you saying this isn't his body? And well, no, we Anglicans believe that you do feed on his body and drink his blood at communion. You do it in a spiritual way, not in a substantial way. We do have real presence. We believe in the real presence of Christ. We just don't believe it in a substantial way. The problem they have is that when Jesus said, "This is my body," on the Last Supper, he was not yet glorified. Um, and the argument from the Lutheran perspective is that the reason he can be in multiple places at one time is because he's in a glorified, resurrected body in heaven. Well, he wasn't before the crucifixion. So what were they? What were the disciples feeding on at the Last Supper before his glorification? Are you saying that his mortal human body at that point was multiplied and joined to that bread? I don't think anybody in the apostles would have understood that to be the case, and I don't think Jesus intended that for to be the understanding of it.
Mhm. Yeah. That's what I love about the 39 articles. I would say, if I leaned any direction, um, if it were an Anglican, it would be probably Lutheran. But it's those two things that you brought up that I can't I can't get behind, and the 39 articles paves a beautiful way between Lutheranism and Calvinism, and and so we as Anglicans, via the 39 articles, would side more closer to the Presbyterian understanding of
Yeah,
the supper and baptism. Is that correct?
not the Zwinglian thread, although
But yeah,
Zwingli's mischaracterized a lot on this. But
yeah,
uh,
yeah. Flesh that out a little bit.
so Zwingli, I think a lot of people on the Lutheran side just paint, and the Roman Catholic side paint Zwingli as a complete basically like a Baptist, someone who just believes in it being pure symbol. He didn't. He believed he also had a sense of you're spiritually feeding on Christ. So it's kind of a misnomer. But I mean, I think there's a richer understanding of the Eucharist on the other side of the Reformed circle from Zwingli. So Calvin had a really robust understanding of communion that he speaks of it in very fleshy terms. If you read his section on the Eucharist and the Institutes, he says, "Oh no, you are feeding on Jesus when you come to that table." And that's what the visible token given to us is supposed to give you confidence you are truly feeding on Christ's body and blood when you come to the table. In fact, for Calvin, the church is lifted up into the heavens to be with Christ in the heavenly realms at the moment of communion. It's a really high thing. And the people before, Calvin wasn't really as prominent when the 39 articles were written, as he became later. So the Eucharistic theology is reformed, but earlier reformed, taken from other reformers who also had that same kind of rich, robust understanding of the feeding of us feeding on Christ at communion. And there's within the Lutheran realm, and this is true for Roman Catholics too. If you don't understand this Eucharist being what they understand it to be, you can't take communion with them. Like there's a closed communion in the
Yeah,
LCMS, and the same thing is true with Rome, which I, I also think is problematic because um, either Jesus meant what he said, like uh, "Do this, remembrance of me. This is my body. This is my blood. Get this, remembrance of me," and that when those words of institution are used, you're actually in some way feeding on him, regardless of your denomination, right? I don't, there's this weird way of thinking. It's in the evangelical realm too, but that you have to have a full orbed understanding of the Eucharist and have it right before you can take communion, which I find
I don't get it. I don't
right. Who can do that? I mean, no one can take communion. I mean,
yeah.
we don't we don't know. I mean, we I have an idea of what happens at the Eucharist, and I'm an Anglican, so I have my understanding of the Eucharistic theology is Anglican one, but it maybe we're wrong.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we have to say we're feeding on Christ, His body and blood,
Yeah.
and so you don't have to have an Anglican understanding of it to take communion in an Anglican church. You just have to be able to trust that you're receiving Christ in some way at the table, and he'll figure that way. But
If
we
it
don't
were
have
that, yeah, well, if it were that case that you had to have, all the details spelled out, in Jesus when he feeds you is like, okay, so what am I doing here? Um, what would you say I'm doing here? Um, like we would need him to be very clear in his word about what he's doing here.
right,
But he leaves it. I mean, like obviously there's a mystery to it because we have so many different views on it. So
right,
it's not fitting in with his character and the revelation of his word. Uh, to take this very important thing that we do as a church that is also very much a mystery, and then to say you have to understand it completely for it to have an effect. Like
right.
that doesn't
Well,
I
it's
understand the thinking.
think about the Passover meal. Like you had to be circumcised to take part, if you're male, to take part in the Passover meal. Um, but what happens at the Passover meal? There's lots of teaching. Like, why are we doing this? The father says, "Here's why we're doing this."
Yeah,
But how much of that do you think the 2-year-old got? The 2-year-old boy. So do you just, oh, I'm sorry, you can't eat, you can't take part of the Passover because you can't understand what Daddy's saying or grandfather's saying.
yeah,
You don't understand what this is about yet, so you can't take part in the Passover meal. No, you took part in the Passover meal if you were circumcised and
right.
you could eat solid food. You could eat it. You need to understand what you were doing because and it was I do think the Passover meal in the old covenant was sacramental.
Mhm.
It was you were joining yourself to the Exodus, to the work of salvation that God did through Moses and bringing the people out of slavery and bondage in Egypt. It wasn't just an
Right.
intellectual remembering; it was a sacramental moment. So the same thing's happening here at the in greater in greater effect, in greater beauty, and greater power at the Eucharist. You're joining the clearest, most explicit detail of what actually is happening is given to us by Paul in 1 Corinthians 10, where he says, "The cup, is it not?" It's a rhetorical question. Is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? And the bread, is it not a participation in the body of Christ? And that word participation is, we've said many times, is koinonia, and it means union or communion. And you take the bread, you're bound up into the body of Christ, and by his actual physical body in heaven, and you are actually drinking his blood. Um, you're participating in his blood. You have a union with his blood in some way. And yet, in that text, Paul's very careful to say when you take the bread, you are participating in the body. So the
Yeah.
bread,
Yep.
he doesn't say it's not bread. He doesn't say it's not a cup of wine. It's the cup. It's the bread. That's what you're taking part of. But in that, you have communion and union with Christ.
I think it's within that we maintain um, the essence of a sacrament, right?
Right.
That you have to have the physical elements and the spiritual reality that they convey.
Right.
Um, but when you conflate them, you're um, confusing what a sacrament even is. You're confusing how God has always worked with physical means.
Right.
He of you know we believe as Anglicans that God does use means of grace. That's what we're talking about. But I think in its Anglican theology here of the sacraments really maintains what that actually like. Uh, I think the best reading of the scriptures when God uses physical stuff to do a real spiritual thing. He he never um, diminishes the physical stuff. It like he's able to attach his power onto that and through that physical stuff to do something.
Yeah.
He's doing it though through a vehicle, and
Right.
he's not uh, conflating that vehicle with the thing that he's doing. Right. So uh, I think Roman Catholics and Lutherans sort of kind of conflate the two, and then miss what it miss out on the physical stuff.
Right.
That's
Right.
good. Yeah, I think that text in First Corinthians 10 is super helpful. The grammar is very intentional there. It's bread that you break, it's wine that you drink, or wine that you bless, right?
Right.
But it's also the body that you eat and
Yeah.
that you drink. So
Right. Right.
work that
Exactly.
one out. Um, so, oh man, well, there's a lot more we could talk about. I mean, we didn't even touch on bishops, and all that stuff, or vestments. Um, and there's so much we could talk about. But I think for anybody uh, who is interested in learning more about Anglicanism, of course, there are great resources we could give. But honestly, picking up a prayer book, the 1662. I mean, 2019 is great as well, but like 1662 is the formulary, one of our formularies. Reading through that, getting it, like seeing what the liturgy is, the 39 articles, our worship and our doctrine. Really, that's what we need to be tethered to as Anglicans. The other stuff, um, ebbs and flows in,
Right.
in Anglican churches, right? Um, but the liturgy and the 39 articles are really the best resources. J.C. Ryle, it's great.
Yeah.
Knots Untied is an awesome book. And it's charitable supposition, not assumption. I got that wrong. Charitable supposition. Anyway, anything else you want to say, Matt?
No, I mean, we should probably talk about why we're not Presbyterians.
Oh,
I,
well, why are you not a
oh,
Presbyterian?
okay. We can do it now. But I think the Presbyterians are great theologically. Um, although I do think it's like there. I think in some realms of Presbyterianism, you can become so bound up in your intellect and in your head that the sacramental aspect of Presbyterianism, which is there historically, right? It's there, but it can get really lost really fast by the emphasis on right doctrine, which is I love the emphasis on right doctrine. Don't get me
Yeah,
wrong, but
yeah.
I think I'm not a big fan of Matt Chandler, but he he says you go to some Reformed churches and you get five sermons. It's either you're having a sermon on the T or a sermon on the U or a sermon on the L or a sermon on I, and you're going back to the T, and it's there you all they it's like always finding ways to get that
Get him in there.
yeah, get that in there. So I found that Anglicanism is a more human, I think, holistic way of worship, and that it involves your body, your mind, your sense of taste, smell, hearing, touch, all of you worship God with your whole self in a way that I don't think you do in Presbyterianism. I also think in some way, not all. Again, I like R.C. Sproul. I think he was if if all Presbyterians were like R.C. Sproul, I would have this objection would not be there. But the other objection I have is that I think sometimes they emphasize so much on the need to check your fruit. I mean,
Hmm.
are you really a Christian? I mean,
Yeah.
are you really bearing fruit? And that I think that's the confusion of law and gospel that
Yeah.
leaves people burdened often. I think in those realms. Again, not every Presbyterian, but
Yeah, no, I've experienced that. Yeah. Um, and yeah, not with Sproul, but yeah, with
yeah,
other Presbyterians. I listen. You I listen to more Lutherans than I do probably anyone else, and mainly because of the law gospel distinction. That's what I need. But
Hmm.
when I sometimes go off and listen to a Presbyterian, um, a lot of the times I leave away feeling pretty guilty,
Yeah. I mean,
burdened. Not like in a good, like
yeah.
convicted way, but like I'm not doing enough.
I
Uh,
believe he's a brother. I'm sure we'll see him in heaven. And out, but Paul Washer, I mean, if you listen to the guy's song, you can't listen to him for like 5 minutes without thinking, okay, I'm not a Christian. It's not a Christian. So,
yeah, yeah, he brought me through a valley, that's for sure.
yeah,
I should say he brought me down into a valley.
yeah,
Yeah. Uh,
yeah.
yeah. That's also why I love the 39 articles because man, when you read like the Westminster Confession, it's like, oof, like you get the sense that
Very detailed.
yeah, you get the sense that you have to really know like all the details of everything
Right.
to be a Presbyterian. Whereas the 39 articles, it's little c Catholic enough,
Yeah.
reformed enough, um, to to like allow Christians
Right.
who differ on various secondary issues to be Anglican.
So like right now, you know why we're having the Christian nationalism fight, or one reason anyway, is because one group of Presbyterians is taking the Westminster standards from Europe in the earlier days, and the other one's taking the Westminster standards as brought to America, and that's why they're fighting because because the European ones do like say, hey, let's have a Christian nation, and the American ones are American, so they're saying no, let's not have a Christian. They're just
And here we all are in the middle of a Presbyterian
right,
battle.
right,
Like, everybody, calm down.
right.
Yeah. Oh man, I don't want to touch the Christian nationalism
Nope,
thing for a
nope.
while.
It's
I
not,
don't know. I don't ever want to touch that in this podcast.
no,
Uh,
no.
all right, Matt. Well, thank you for this, and thank you everyone for listening. For those who joined us live, good to have you with us, and uh, for everyone listening in the future, thank you. And Lord willing, we'll be with you again next week. I'm thinking, yeah, there isn't anything going on. Once we get to Holy Week,
That will change.
that'll change. There'll be some weeks where we're off, but no, Lord willing, we'll be here next week. So, all right, have a great week, Matt.
You too.
All right,
Thank you.
I'll see you.